Hi everybody, my name is Chris. I am the second host of CA Overwatch. In this podcast today, we chatted with Jay, the GM from the Toronto Defiant, which was awesome. We split the episode up into two different parts. The first part talks more about Toronto Defiant in the 2019 season, and the second part chats about their acquisitions, their current camp in Korea, and Toronto Defiant's outlook for 2020. So we were super excited to film it, and we hope that you'll like it too. And if you do like it, remember to smash that subscribe button, smash that like button, hit that keyboard with those comments. And if you don't like it, hit that keyboard again, unless it's broken. Anyway, thanks.
To start off by talking first about sort of like the experience you had in 2019 and you know sort of some of the lessons you learned from the Defiant overall, and like the, you know, how you selected the roster and sort of where things went from there.
So with 2019, it was kind of unfortunate because we had a very limited amount of time to develop, to actually also look at scout, number one, to pick out a team, also to pick out a head coach. So we didn't find out we had an Overwatch League spot until pretty much free agency had already started, and then we had to scramble.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So like once that part happened and we had to go like, you know, full steam ahead, I was basically in a race to try to find a head coach, and I had interviewed a couple. The most promising had been Bishop for us, just because, you know, we went by his past results. However, at the same time, we did have some reservations because he didn't have a great, like, he was there, he helped develop the team for London Spitfire, but then he didn't stay with the team. So that, you know, obviously that was very worrying for us. But at the same time, it's terrible to go on pure rumors about a player because you can never know, right? It's because everything could be hearsay, not a player, but about a coach.
Yeah.
You know, because you could hear good things and bad things about a coach, but you don't really know until something's actually verified about somebody. So, you know, at the time, he was our best bet to going into season 2, and we went with that. Okay. And then, you know, obviously he built out the coaches he wanted, and we wanted to do a Korea boot camp, and we used that boot camp actually. That's where we actually, you know, was our trials. So that very much differed from our 2020 setup. So 2019's boot camp was over a month long. It was almost 2 months long, and that's when we actually did our trials. But because we started pretty late in the season, we were pretty behind on trying to get a lot of the people we wanted. So they did have, the coachings did have, like, you know, picks that they wanted, but then a lot of these picks that we went after them, and then things would fall through, or we would spend like weeks, you know, talking to these 3 players, and then find out, hey, we've decided to sign with somebody else. And you know, it's just, you know, just one way or another, because a lot of times it's not so much how much you're willing to pay a player, but a player also wants to see what team you've already developed.
Exactly.
So if you have nothing, no foundation there, and you're developing from scratch, and they see that, hey, I'm going to join this team, but I have doubts about who else is going to join this team with me. Or that player can go for another team that already has most of their roster set, or a good chunk of their roster set. It's a little different. So,
yeah, then I'm sure, just like how, you know, people get hyped over teams who do well, if you have a team like Spitfire or another team from the first inaugural season playing really well, like, they want to go there because they want to have a little bit of that clout, right?
Yeah. And then for us, during the season, we did have a lot of unfortunate things happen to us.
Yeah. Because that's what I was going to say. Obviously, it started so well with stage 1, right? And then it kind of went less well after that.
Well, it wasn't good that at the start of stage 2, we lost one of our key players.
Stellar. Yeah. No, absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah. So the timing of that really hurt us, because when you have 1 week before the start of stage 2, and you just have a player retiring,
Yeah.
we have no replacements for him. Because people can say, why didn't you just play Asher? Number one, Asher hadn't scrimmed for like 3 months.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you can't just throw Asher. He himself wasn't enjoying the game anymore. That's why he was the second person to retire from our team.
Yeah.
So he wasn't really motivated. You know, a lot of it had to do. It's not Asher's fault at all. It's actually we worried about him a lot because he was unsure at the end of season 1 what he wanted to do with his life, and because video gaming had been such a core part of his life, he still wanted to try it out. But then as the season progressed, he realized that he didn't have the same passion he had for it anymore, and that's why he eventually retired. And it was we all supported him in that decision. Now, the only fortunate thing with Stellar was that he decided to retire on us with very little warning, and I have nothing. It didn't upset me or anything. Yeah. It just because you have to roll with the punches basically.
Yeah,
exactly.
If stuff happens, you just have to basically accept it, and you have to do your best to move on. What people also don't realize is when that suddenly happens, you have a very limited window to find someone because you have to play, right? And then, so I am 37. We found him because one of our players just watched his stream and said, "Hey, this guy has good aim. He's in Canada. He speaks Korean and English. Maybe we can get him really quickly." So that's what we did. We just got, and that's why he was the fastest person to ever make it into the
speedrunner. Yeah,
he was a speedrunner.
But there must have been. I mean, obviously, I know there's the Canadian element to it. There's the bilingual element to it, and you're right. Like he would know from XQC stream, and there was hype surrounding him. But was there anybody else during that time? Because I agree with you. I think that really was a turning point for this team during the season, trying to replace Stellar. Was there anyone else sort of at that point that was on your radar that you really looked at, or was it sort of just like someone was like, "I'm 37." You watched the VOD review of his Contenders game, and you're like, "Yeah, that's my guy."
No, definitely not. So.
Yeah,
there was plenty of people we would have taken, but they already had to have a visa. If they have no visa, we can't take them. So we're an all-Korean team. It's an all-Korean team. You can only use a Korean player. We can't. We really couldn't throw stuff.
I didn't even think. Yeah,
we really could not. Yeah, people are thinking, why don't you just get somebody else and try? Like, who are we going to trial? You can't trial Korean players because their visas won't be ready for another 2 months.
Yeah.
So what do? So we kind of were left, between a rock and a hard place. We had to make a sudden decision, and we went with IM37, who is a very talented player. It's just he had no experience.
Yeah, so yeah. Mechanically,
when
you're
a
right.
Player has mechanically he is a great player, but then he has 0 experience playing in real scrims. He has 0 experience. He has very little tier 2 experience, let alone tier 1 experience. Has none of that, and so he basically, and at the same time, he had to play Brig, which he had never done before.
Completely. So that was the thing. It's like, I was going to say, it was like you got this like hit scan specialist. So one of his knocks was he didn't have a lot of experience, but on top of that, it was like, hey, here's Brigitte. We want you to play that.
Yeah. So we had to teach him how to play Brigitte.
Yeah.
And the thing is, people can say, why don't you just make him play Zarya, which we tried.
Yeah. Now, but also Ivy was doing really well too, right? Like you don't want to throw Ivy off his game.
Yeah. And the thing is, what people have to realize, being a good hit scan player does not mean you're a good Zarya player.
For sure.
There's so many examples of Season 2.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Great hit scan players. They're absolutely trash Zaryas. So, all right?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, yeah.
I think on Ivy was, at least in the first stage, not one of them. I remember seeing his stats. He was like one of the, for stage 1, he's like, top 3 like damage for 10 minutes. I was like, wow, Ivy's doing great.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it has nothing. Being a good Zarya during GOATs had nothing to do with your aim.
Bubble management, positioning.
Bubble management. Yeah, there's so much more involved than just aim. And so that's why there was so many terrible Zaryas that came from hit scan players that just, that those teams just did terribly. IM37 was not a good Zarya for us. He could be a very good tracer, but it was a GOATS meta.
Exactly,
so we had to teach him how to play. We had to teach him how to play Brigitte. So this just sort of spiraled with our team because we went from a very good stage 1 losing one of our key players, not having the time to train up another player, and also having a player that had very little experience. So then progressively the team would do worse. And then because of it, players that were already on the team, their morale shot down. And so even if they did well stage 1, we were going to do terribly stage 2 because, it sort of was like a domino effect where, we just lost a player. Because we're teaching this player, our scrims are going to go worse. Our matches are going to go worse. And the players get a lot more, just unhappy about the entire situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then at certain point, our off tank wanted to leave because, he either wanted to leave or we had to make drastic changes to the roster.
Yeah.
And one of the hardest things for us was that we couldn't find teams willing to sell us players during the season.
Interesting.
We tried with many teams, and during the season, most teams were not willing to part with anybody. So we were stuck because we couldn't use Korea Contenders players because the visas would take too long.
Mm-hmm.
None of the Korean players in Overwatch League were available because the teams didn't want to let them go. Even if they were benched, it could be players that were benched for 2 stages. We just couldn't get anybody. Nobody were willing to sell players. So
interesting. Yeah.
We were. So
that kind of makes sense because, you're anticipating a meta change. Maybe 2-2-2s come in. You don't know if this bench person is gonna maybe come off the bench and be a main player.
Yeah. So most teams were just held on to their players the entire time, even if they weren't going to use them, just because they knew possible meta changes could change the course of how their team would look.
Yeah. So is this one of the reasons that why you sort of just decided to go mixed roster? Because that was another thing that I thought was another turning point, was sort of the slow introduction of the Western-speaking players to the already established Korean-speaking roster. Was it sort of just eventually you knew a change had to happen and you couldn't get Korean Contenders players, so you looked at Montreal Rebellion and said, "Here we go"?
So we were eventually a lot of it had to do with the fact that the Rebellion was destroying the Defiant and scrims. So that wasn't a good look.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, for sure.
Yeah. So because the Rebellion kept beating on the Defiant and scrims for a long time, that didn't help.
Yeah, no, I could, especially if you're a Montreal Rebellion player, right? You're in tier 2. You're like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, and a lot of the Rebellion. Well, so not the first iteration of Rebellion, but when they got Gods and Sharik, is when the team turned around and they actually they were a lot better than us, and it wasn't. It had nothing to do with individual mechanical skill, because in Goats is probably one of the most teamwork oriented metas ever.
Exactly,
and they just had better teamwork than we did. They had players that would trust each other, would listen to each other's plans, and because we had so many people that. We had so much low morale on the Defiant, you just couldn't get anything going because nobody would really, the effort wasn't there. It was maybe a 70% effort most of the time for the team. And it was not much we could do. We tried sports psychologists. We had, from Overactive, we had one of our things was we had performance development coach come in and everything, but just nothing would help really. So, it got to a point when players just didn't want to play with each other. So we decided, hey, you know what? There had been a plan to eventually transition in English speaking into the roster at some point.
Yeah.
But we accelerated that plan by at least a year.
Yeah.
Because Now, then we also faced the issue with that we brought in the 2 key elements that that helped with a lot of the issues on Rebellion, but now they're on Defiant, and their main issue now is there's massive language barriers.
Yeah, for sure.
So, so even though we're doing English classes and we had a team translator and our head coach was bilingual, the issues were massive. We would have our off tank trying to plan stuff in game, and 2/3 of the team have no idea what he's saying half the time. So, and then,
for sure. And obviously, it's great that you have a bilingual coach and all this stuff and the English classes. But yeah, learning a language, yeah, super hard, right? That's an unrealistic expectation on top of scrimming, on top of all these other sort of stuff that they have to go through. So no, I understand that would be super difficult.
And also that's the one thing, like you have your pre-planned stuff, but like the one thing that would affect is spontaneity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hurt spontaneity in that type of way. So that totally makes sense.
Because the thing is, you can have pre-planned comps, and then you can have comps to switch to when the enemy has comps, or just like plans.
Yeah, exactly.
But the thing is, you don't have. There's no in-game discussion because they don't really understand each other.
Yeah.
And that, stuff that is very vital, like just and
absolutely.
it was very unfortunate for us that things turned out that way, and then we decided at some point, like let's just go more Western, which we did. We were like, let's just take more players in from the rebellion.
Yeah.
And the only issue we had during this time with adding more players from the rebellion was that the meta wasn't very good for how we were set up. Like 1-3-1 was not very good for how the teammate goes. So like, 2-3-1, which so the whole like using what was it 1-3-2? Yeah, the whole triple DPS setup.
Yeah.
Because we really couldn't get that coordinated because we had 2 DPS that were English speaking and one that only spoke Korean.
Yeah.
So they couldn't coordinate things very well. So because of the language barriers there. So
totally
that was
sense.
Unfortunate too.
Yeah.
That makes total sense. So yeah, that's good transition. Like I want to now kind of like look into more forward looking for, our new roster setup and